Come on.
All right, we are live. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Our final time. It's kind of sad, but also monumentous, I feel like. It's been a great summer reading.
2.5 months to read a book, then, this is it. We're finally here. And you don't have to worry about spoilers anymore, Naomi.
I know. I'm so excited. I'm like, Valentine doesn't die. I'm trying to not like
That's awesome.
But it's so great. So, yeah, it's going to be exciting to go over everything today that we want to.
I have some notes, so yes, very exciting.
It's a very good finale in a way, but then the last 15 pages or whatever, I'm like, with Hadi, that's a weird section. I think that's the problem for most Count Monte Cristo fans. So Penny is here. Hello.
Hello.
Penny.
So we are all finished. So we're going to go into all spoilers. So if anyone's watching, because I know last time we had someone who was like, should I watch if I don't want spoilers? I'm like, no. So if you want to watch and you don't want spoilers, then you should maybe read the book first, because we're going to go into whatever we want that happened, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's a fun way to go.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah. So I saw that you rated it 5 stars, Janelle.
I sure did. It was so much fun. I loved it. And I loved that I couldn't really anticipate what the count was going to do at the end. And that's one of the reasons why I loved it. But I also loved that I got my redemption arc. And so, but it was like a long time in before I was like, are we going to get a redemption arc or not? And I actually kind of like that it took so long to get there. But yeah, I loved it. I loved it.
What about you, Christy?
I don't know what I would rate it, but I liked the ending, but there was a really large swath in the middle there where I was on the struggle bus. I think books that have a lot, like a humongous cast, and aren't particularly character driven are just very difficult for me. But when it all came together, it was really good.
Yeah, I think this one's like one of my favorites because of just how much there is in the story. That's why it's like, if I were on a deserted island, I'd bring this one, because there's just like the revenge, the love, there's all the different things, and it lasts so long too. So it's a nice, easy getaway book. But
it's very complex, the plotting is.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out what the climax of the book was, because we spent our last live, we were talking about it was still in the rising action and we hadn't got to the climax yet. And now that I'm done, I'm like, I still don't know if I can nail down the climax. I wonder if you could actually say there was multiples, or maybe that it started. See, I don't know. Kind of each time he confronted one of his villains, that seems like a climax, right?
Yes.
So maybe it's there's actually 3 or 4 climaxes.
For each plot arc, there was a separate climax.
Yeah.
And a separate ending in a way. So it was just I don't know, 4 or 5 stories in one at times. You're like, that's going on. But yeah, I really love how all the villains ended up differently. I also found that this time I really loved Villefort, because it's he starts off really unscrupulous and then he really has to go through a moral change too. Villefort is not just a simple villain.
No. Yeah, no, he's not. You know what I'm starting to wonder now? If the climax is the same thing as the turning point in a book? Do you think, or not?
That's a good question.
Because I think, now that I've been thinking about it, I think the turning point was actually the conversation that he had with Mercedes, where you kind of got this impression where he's starting to change from being 100% focused on revenge to realizing that maybe there's something else. And it took that conversation with Mercedes for that to happen. And so that might not be the climax, but I think that that was the turning point in the book, because that was where he started to realize that maybe it's not all about revenge, and that maybe there is room for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. I think also when he has the conversation with Morel, that I think is a big part of his personal development, where he actually realizes his actions have consequences on people who he actually cares about too. So he doesn't like have complete control over everyone like puppets. And then also when Villefort's son is murdered in the process, I think he also fully realizes that he has actually created so many problems, and he has fully destroyed families to the point where I don't think he wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
He finally disassociates his own revenge plans from God's judgment.
Yeah.
Because he's like, because I am imperfect.
Yeah.
He finally realizes he's not the savior and the judgment of everybody in his life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was a painful moment.
Yeah. Very sad when little Edward dies.
Yeah.
But
yes.
I think that cumulated what was like happening. He just didn't realize that he didn't have people all under his control until that point. So.
Right. Well, exactly. Because I think like he probably anticipated that he was more focused on Villefort, right? Like forcing Villefort to actually do something about his wife. And he didn't consider the consequences of what that would look like. Right. And so the fact that Villefort's wife would actually kill her son before she killed herself, I don't even know if that even crossed his mind as a possibility. So like you were saying, he's realizing that he's set in motion events that he didn't anticipate the outcome of.
Yeah. And I also thought it was interesting. I noted that every time a villain had their end moment or whatever, there was always like a chapter ending where it was like, this person had no child. Like Danglars no longer had a daughter. And then at a certain point, Mercedes and her son leave. And it's like, it says Mercedes and her son left, not Mercedes and Albert. So it's like clearly cutting off all the children from the families. But I don't think he meant to do those things. And he just completely either destroyed a future generation or like, I don't know, pass those sins down like maybe he wanted to in a way that he didn't expect.
Yeah. Yeah. I marked that one passage where he talks about like where he's having his big confrontation with Villefort. But he added into it is, Villefort's like, look at my son kind of thing. And I thought that was it was just so powerful, like, because he's like, he's finally having the moment where he is confronting Villefort, but I don't think it's what he expected it to be, because he's looking at this son. So he says, I am Edmond Dantes. You are Edmond Dantes, cried Villefort, seizing the count by the wrist. Then come here. And up the stairs he dragged Monte Cristo, who, ignorant of what had happened, followed him in astonishment, foreseeing some new catastrophe. There, Edmond Dantes, he said, pointing to the bodies of his wife and child. See, you are well avenged. Monte Cristo became pale at this horrible sight. He felt that he had passed beyond the bonds of vengeance, and that he could no longer say, God is for and with me. With an expression of indescribable anguish, he threw himself upon the body of the child, reopened its eyes, felt its pulse, and then rushed with him into Valentine's room, of which he double locked the door. So it's just so interesting, like, he's really starting to question. I mean, he had started before, but this was like the big moment for him of like, is what I am doing legit? Because so much of it, and I noticed this too, like there's this theme of the avenging angel. Like he fully considered himself a righteous, revenging angel. And now he's starting to wonder, how much is it righteous, right? Like,
yeah.
And that whole theme of him being a revenging angel is really fascinating, actually.
Yeah. It's very interesting to have that whole play out because, like I said, Villefort has that moral change, whereas the others, we don't see that. So I think that's why it impacted him so greatly.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, there was a follow-up to that. 1 second. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it was just before that. He says, Dante says to him, I come to tell you that you have sufficiently repaid your debt and that from this moment I will pray to God to forgive you as I do. So this is before he realizes that the son's dead. So he's like, this is his big moment, right? Like, I'm letting you know you've repaid your debt and I've forgiven you and maybe God will too. And then all of a sudden he finds out the ramifications of it and that Villefort has definitely repaid his debt way more than Dante's even realized would happen.
Yeah. And he didn't seem to have any worry about he knew Madame Villefort was the one poisoning people, but he didn't care about that until one, it hit Morale, Maximilian, exactly. And two, at the end when he's like, and this actually killed a little child too. He didn't care about any the grandparents. He didn't care about the servant. He didn't care about the fact that he actually had unleashed a serial killer with their weapon.
Yeah.
So, that's a good point.
And then he suddenly changes, right? Then it's like he changes and his plan turns into how can I save Valentine and how can I, help Morale and Valentine be together. He has this switch from being focused on revenge to focusing on someone else and how he could help them.
Yeah, there was a line at the back where it was kind of it was his penance or something. It didn't say that, but it was like he had chosen it as his remorse, where he was like, I'm going to save these two lives because of all the lives I've actually ended.
Yeah.
In such a horrible way. I don't think he might have expected Ferdinand to shoot himself, but I don't think he fully felt the ramifications of all that. And then also with the Danglars, Eugenie, he had no idea, I'm sure, of her running off forever. Right. I don't think that was something he thought about.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about that Fernand and his suicide, because I found that whole thing so fascinating. And maybe it's just because I don't fully understand duels and the rules and the honor and everything, because even before that, the whole thing with the duel with Albert, I was like, I'm not really sure I understand what's happening here. And then all of a sudden Fernand, he runs to Dante's house and I don't understand. I guess I just didn't understand what he was thinking of there. Because he's suddenly I need to avenge my son. But in a weird way, because Dante's didn't actually kill him. I guess I just I don't understand how duels work, maybe. So hang on.
Yeah, that whole cultural thing, I don't understand fully. I'm from what I understood of this, I think Ferdinand was more worried, or offended that they hadn't gone through with it. And I feel also to a certain extent, even though he didn't recognize the Count as Edmund, I think he also was this guy's my enemy. And then his son didn't follow through with that.
Yeah.
So he probably was also, I need to follow through with this now.
Suddenly everything is kind of all happening at once now too, right? Because I had noted that just before Fernand arrives at Dante's house, Dante's is having a conversation with Haydée, and he's kind of starting to realize that maybe there's a future. Which I thought was interesting. Monte Cristo was beginning to think what he had not for a long time dared to believe, that there were two Mercedes in the world and he might yet be happy. It was he was suddenly there could be a different ending for me in this. That he's starting to consider a life after his revenge. And then all of a sudden, Fernand bursts into the house with this, you know, he's like, my son had good reasons to fight with you. But yeah. And then, so that they're about to have this big fight. And then Dante's also all of a sudden is like, this is who I am. And then Fernand runs home and kills himself. I'm like, oh, okay. Like suddenly, like everything starts to happen so fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we talked about last time how he's like emotional, how Ferdinand is just an emotional reactor or something. I think that's, I don't remember if we talked about that, but it feels like that's the case. He just like, he doesn't know how to connect the potential aside from just being like, well, now I'm dead because this guy knows everything. And he's unkillable, apparently.
Because he saw his wife and son leaving the house when he ran out to go and confront Dante's, right?
I think it was on the way back.
On the way back. So it was like this whole culmination for him of like, you know, people now know who I am, or like he was in trouble with the court thing. And then he had his whole encounter and Dante's revealed himself. And then he was like, his son and his wife is leaving. He was just like, and he gave himself no time to consider any of it. So I think you're right that he reacts to everything just very emotionally. And he was just like instantly, that's it. There's nothing else for me. I'm just going to shoot myself.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting how Danglars had his revenge, where it was like suddenly Edmund's not like, oh, I want to kill you, first of all, but I want to make you suffer.
Yeah,
like he made him suffer like his father.
Yeah. I think that was my favorite revenge plot. It was like, that's very direct of you. Make him starve for a couple days.
Pay tons of money for any food he gets. And then eventually he'll be, you know, realizing what he had done to someone else.
Yeah.
But he still was able
I'm
to
not
walk
surprised
away.
that he kind of left Danglars to the end, right? Because Danglars was kind of like the big one, the main one, the most, because he was the most, what's the word? Danglars was the most invested, or like he was the one that started it all with his hatred of Dante's, that I don't fully understand why he hated him so much, but yeah. And then that Dante's you know, left him for the end, and you know, didn't just take away his reputation and his money, but you know, he was like, you know, you need to know what you did, you know, to my father and everything.
Yes. Yeah. That was really intense.
It was.
And it was interesting to see the bandits come back, like have them be a part of it again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was so good. And it was interesting because Danglars didn't have to starve. He just had to pay. So, I mean, he had to have that moment of like, what's more important to me, my money or my life? You know, so it was totally revenge, but it was also Dante's was forcing him to confront these issues, right? Like, what is the more important to you in your life? But then it was so fascinating to me that since Danglars was like the big one that he wanted to revenge, and he did totally, you know, his reputation and his money and all of that. But then when they did finally have their big confrontation scene, what does Dante's do? He forgives him.
Yeah.
I guess it was so fascinating. So before his first line, when he starts to reveal himself, he says, "Do you repent?" asked a deep, solemn voice, which caused Danglars' hair to stand on end. His feeble eyes endeavored to distinguish objects, and behind the bandit he saw a man enveloped in a cloak, half lost in the shadow of a stone column. "Of what must I repent?" stammered Danglars. So, I mean, he's still not really, you know, willing to admit that he's done wrong things. "Of the evil," you know, and then he says, "of the evil that you've done." And then they have their big confrontation, which, yeah, I just thought it was so great that after all of that, Dante's And I think it took Dante's having that conversation with Mercedes, realizing the possibilities with Haiti and a future before him, that he could say, I forgive you. Because I wonder what initially he wanted to do in that conversation, in that confrontation.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if initially his response would have been forgiveness.
It's true.
Yeah. By then
I thought it was
he
interesting.
changed.
Sorry, I'll let you go for Christy.
I just said by then he had been changed.
Exactly.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting how each of the villains met their own demise because of the same reason they put, like, or they tried to frame Edmond Dantes. So, like, Ferdinand wanted the family, and then when he realized that his family had turned against him, he killed himself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then with Danglars, he wanted all the money and the position, so he got all the money through that. And then it's through money that he learns his lesson by having to give it up every day.
That's
and then
true.
Villefort was all about reputation. Mm-hmm. And his whole family was killed by his wife, and he went mad.
The truth of what he had done with the son, the fact that all coming out in court, of which he was presiding, like he lost his reputation entirely. Yeah, and then he goes crazy. So his reputation from now on forever will be as the man who went crazy.
Yeah. So all of them were destroyed by what they wanted originally.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That's fascinating. Yes. That's true. That's good.
Yeah. I also really loved how Edmond Dantes is just a drama king. Like, the fact that with Morel's father, with Monsieur Morel, he's like, I will come back on this date, and then this will be the thing. And it was like, seriously? And then he does it again with Maximilian, and he's like, give me 1 month to the exact hour. And then he shows up, and he's like, well, we have 3 hours left, so let's sit down to dine. It's like, you can't just show him Valentine yet. Just...
It took so long. Although I think honestly, he was doing it for Maximilian's good, because he was like, do you really want to do this? And he let him go that far and actually try to kill himself before he revealed Valentine was alive. Yeah, I thought that was so interesting. And let me just say, this was one of the things that I actually could figure out in the story. I knew the whole time. I was like, Valentine's totally not dead. He's doing a Romeo and Juliet right now.
Yes.
There's no question.
But yeah, no, the whole thing of no, we're going to wait till the exact hour before I reveal the person. It's like, okay, I think you just like the drama sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
He reminds me of Sherlock Holmes in that way. I'm going to reveal things bit by bit, all in my own time, just for the drama.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Backing up for a minute, though, before we keep talking about the very end, I noted a passage in the chapter where they're supposed to have the big contract signing between
Yes.
Everybody has too many names.
The half-siblings.
Conte or whatever, and Eugenie.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, first of all, I didn't realize these things were such a big deal. There were so many people that were invited to come and watch them sign a piece of paper saying we intend to get married. I was like, wow, this is a big...
It's like a giant engagement party.
Yeah, exactly. But there's this description of the entrance of the Count, which I found so fascinating. Here it is. At each moment, in the midst of the crowd, the buzzing and the laughter, the doorkeeper's voice was heard announcing some name well known in the financial department, respected in the army, or illustrious in the literary world, and which was acknowledged by a slight movement in the different groups. But for one whose privilege it was to agitate that ocean of human waves, how many were received with a look of indifference or a sneer of disdain. At that moment, when the hand of the massive timepiece representing Endymion asleep pointed to 9 on its golden face, and the hammer, the faithful type of mechanical thought, struck 9 times. The name of the Count of Monte Cristo resounded in its turn, and as if by an electric shock, all the assembly turned towards the door. It's like you were saying about the drama, like,
yeah,
you know, like, did he plan it that way? Because that is
like, I'm gonna wait till the 9th bell.
Exactly. And like everybody turns. He's here. The Count has arrived.
Yeah. So funny. I also loved after that how it's described Andrea, who when he like escapes, I have to find it, but when he's just like, oh, I'm just wandering through things, and he happens to find the month, like all the jewels. It's like, it just was such a funny description. I'm gonna have to find that.
Yes, it's gonna be around page 743, a little bit after that.
Here it is. So my book is chapter 99, so I guess that'd be chapter 98. But it says, so we have seen the first rumor, or no, notwithstanding his youth, Master Andrea was very skilled and intelligent boy. We have seen that on the first rumor that reached the saloon, he gradually approached the door and crossing 2 or 3 rooms at last disappeared. But we'd forgotten to mention one circumstance, which nevertheless ought to be not omitted. In one of the rooms he crossed, the trousseau of the bride-elect was on exhibition. There were caskets of diamonds, cashmere shawls, all these things. And then he's not only proving himself clever and intelligent, but also provident, for he helped himself to the most valuable of the ornaments before him. So it's just like, let's just talk about all the things that we're seeing. And I'm like, and by the way, the guy's going to get all the stuff that he wants. He doesn't need the girl. He got the money.
I did think it was funny too that he takes off, and so he goes on the run, and so does Eugenie, and that they end up in the same inn.
And he crashes her room.
Yes, that whole thing was so funny. And again, like with the coincidences, right? Like that they end up in the same inn.
But like, wasn't it his foster father who was driving him and he never recognized them? Wasn't that? Maybe I'm putting the wrong character in the wrong place.
Was that who was driving him?
It was one of the Count's people, I thought.
That's who came to see him in prison, and that's who told him the truth so that he could make the big reveal at the trial.
Yes.
After he gets arrested.
But one of the guys was like, he's like, I need a cab. And it was like, oh, there's one. And it happened to be the Count's guy.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I forgot that part.
Yes, it was Benedito who picked him up. So his foster father, and he didn't recognize him. He's like, yes, good sir. Drive me as fast as you can. I know who you are.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, there's the stress of the situation and the fact that people don't really look at, servants or, drivers and stuff like that. So maybe it was just.
Yeah.
Because he would totally have recognized him.
Yeah. You would think.
Yeah.
That whole situation was just filled with comedy, but at the same time, you're like, this guy's a bad guy. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did wonder where it was going with that. I'm like, no, he can't escape. Like, there has to be, like, Villefort needs to find out who that guy is. Yeah. And then in the middle of all of that, Valentine gets poisoned. And I was like, okay, so there's a lot going on there too, right? Because her grandfather, he recognizes that he either recognizes that she's being poisoned or knows that it's a distinct possibility because he starts doping her up with the stuff that he takes to build up her immunity or something to the poison. Again, like that guy's awesome. I like that guy. He's a pretty great character. But then when the Count finds out from Morel that Morel loves Valentine. So the Count he's like, okay. And he gets his priest disguise and, goes to the house next door. And he's suddenly like, I'll just take care of this. And so he just, there's coincidentally, again, there is a passage that leads directly to Valentine's room.
Yeah. Convenient.
So that he can.
I remember a sentence saying like they started construction on the new place.
Oh, right.
So maybe they built the passage.
They built it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I might have missed that part.
Too funny, though.
But again, like the fact that he did that was just more proof that he's softening, that he's changing, right? Like his heart of stone is totally softening back up, and that he is starting to switch from his revenge ideas to how can he help people. Because I mean, ultimately, like, why should he care about Valentine and morale? But he does, you know, and so he does protect her. And I love that he, instead of just like saying, trust me, this is who's killing you, he was like, okay, I'll show you. This is who is poisoning you.
That was such a great
again the drama. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I also think the most touching thing in the whole like end section for me, I don't know if it's going to be the whole book or not, because there's a lot that goes on in this book, but I think the most touching thing was like when he went back to Chateau d'If, and he was back in his cell, and he was like forced to confront those 14 years. Well, like he wasn't forced to, he went back on his own accord, but when he went back into his own cell and like with the dark, and he confronted, you know, his demons from the past. And then also we went to the Abbe's place, and then he managed to get his hands on the book. But it was like that whole scene, I think, really showed how much he was like different.
Yes. Yeah.
And I had totally forgotten that part was in the book. So I was really surprised to see that.
Yeah. That was good. I think that was important for him to do that, right? To confront the past, because we talked in the last live stream about how he never had really worked through that or thought that much about it. Like he was so focused on his revenge that he hadn't really, you know, worked that through. And so going back there, I think was really important for him. Yeah.
There was Tiffany, who was sort of reading along with us, even though she couldn't make it to the live streams. She had read the abridged version twice, and she said, I loved this one even more because it included so much stuff that they took out. And she was like, I wish they hadn't taken any of that out because it added so much. So some of those scenes that might I think a lot of those scenes are important, the ones that they were taking out. I think it fully fleshed it out.
Yeah. I don't understand who the person whose job it is to abridge a book like this, like, how do you do that? Like, how do you take stuff out that's, you know, you're like, okay, well, this isn't important to the plot, or this, because you're right, Christy, like basically anything they take out is going to be important to the plot. So I don't even know how they do that.
I can think of one chapter, which is where they describe how the bandits come together. Like that chapter, that can be minimized, but that's it. I can't think of anything else that's not crucial to the development of every storyline, but also the development of Edmond Dantes, who turned into the villain of the book and then works his way back into, you know, serving a penance essentially for what he's done.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One thing I noticed, which I thought was hilarious. So during the Assizes, that chapter where Cavalcante, or whatever his name is actually on trial, and everybody's gathering, and Debray notices a woman, she's all veiled, in the crowd. And I don't know if they've revealed who it is yet, but it's Madame Danglars. But I thought it was so funny because Debray says to his friends, he followed with his eyes the direction of Beauchamp's glance. Come, he said, it is only a veiled lady, some foreign princess, perhaps the mother of Cavalcante. But you were just speaking on a very interesting topic, Beauchamp. And then they just move on to other things. And I just thought it was so funny because it was the mother of Cavalcante, but like it never gets revealed, right? Like Villefort gets taken down, but the woman in the house, the mother of that child, is never named, is she?
No.
I don't think so.
He doesn't know it. Because Benedito didn't know the mother, right? He only knew Villefort.
That's right.
And then he told his side of the story to his foster son.
Right. So I just think that's so funny that he gets it right, but he'll never know that he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like that Mercedes came back, or like into the story, not came back to Dante's because she didn't. But like she came back into the story after they left, and we were able to see them after the fact and how they are different without, I mean, not completely different, but they are, you know, they're poor, but they're dependent on each other. They're not living off of spoiled money, which they now know is earned in a horrible way. So it's interesting to see that perspective of them. And I liked seeing that Albert, you know, goes off to the army and he's trying to make himself into something as opposed to just living off of whatever he could.
And I really loved that final scene too between Dante's and Mercedes. I thought it was good. Like their previous scene was great, but like I did think this needed to be in there, this final scene between the two of them, and that it included again Dante's considering himself a divine instrument but questioning it. He has that conversation with Mercedes, which makes sense because it was because of Mercedes that he actually started questioning it in the first place. He says, you are a noble-minded woman, and it was your grief that disarmed me. Still, I was but an agent, led on by an invisible and offended deity who chose not to withhold the fatal blow that I was destined to hurl. I take that God to witness, at whose feet I have prostrated myself daily for the last 10 years, that I would have sacrificed my life to you, and with my life the projects that were indissolubly linked with it. But, and I say it with some pride, Mercedes, God needed me and I lived. Examine the past and the present and endeavor to dive into futurity and then say whether I am not a divine instrument. The most dreadful misfortunes, the most frightful sufferings, the abandonment of all those who loved me, the persecution of those who did not know me, formed the trials of my youth. When suddenly, from captivity, solitude, misery, I was restored to light and liberty and became the possessor of a fortune so brilliant, so unbounded, so unheard of, that I must have been blind not to be conscious that God had endowed me with it to work out his own great designs. From that time, I looked upon this fortune as something confided to me for an especial purpose. Not a thought was given to a life which you once, Mercedes, had the power to render blissful. Not 1 hour of peaceful calm was mine, but I felt myself driven on like an exterminating angel. Like adventurous captains about to embark on an enterprise full of danger, I laid in my provisions, I loaded my weapons, I collected every means of attack and defense. I inured my body to the most violent exercises, my soul to the bitterest trials. I taught my arm to slay, my eyes to behold excruciating sufferings, and my mouth to smile at the most horrid spectacles. Good-natured, confiding, and forgiving as I had been, I became revengeful, cunning, and wicked, or rather immovable as fate. Then I launched out into the path that was opened to me. I overcame every obstacle and reached the goal, but woe to those who stood in my path. Yeah.
He definitely had to come to that point with Mercedes. I think also seeing her again helped him realize for sure that he would move past her with feelings. Like he was no longer tied to her.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. There's so much going on in this section. It was hard to like keep track of it all, but it was also like building to that the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
Lots of great speeches too, like Janelle was reading.
Yeah. I really noticed too, like just how much of this theme of the avenging angel kept coming up in this last section. I mean, it was there in the previous sections too, but I think it kept coming up because, you know, he was starting to question that, like, or question the, like how legit that was, that he was he really an avenging angel or not? And was he a righteous avenging angel or not? And so it was so interesting to just see how much of that was in this last section.
Yeah. Because we never saw him questioning himself for like, 70% of the book or something, ever since he decided that he needs to get revenge. He's very steady about that.
Mm-hmm.
This section had a lot of like the end results of people, but at the same time, it had a lot of the moral dilemma that he had as the Count and as Edmond Dantes. He had to figure out how to merge those two worlds. But it was really the moral dilemma. There were so many of those in this section, which were really interesting.
Yeah. And it was also like through all of his confrontations with everybody and this moral dilemma, you could see him turning back into Dante's, right? Like for so much of the middle section of the book, he was the Count of Monte Cristo and nothing else. But now in this book, it's like he's turning back into Dante's again. Yeah.
And it was interesting when Morel arrived at County Cristo, he saw the Count and he's like, "You're laughing." And it was like, we never see him enjoying life before. He's just out for revenge. And then he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." It's like, no, like, be happy. Like, this is not a bad thing. So I thought that was really interesting because I hadn't noted that before until Morel said that. I'm like, wait a second. He's never enjoyed the rest of his life that we've seen. He's just been in that revenge mode.
Right. But by that point, it was done. All of that was done. And he was looking forward to a different kind of life and one that allowed him to laugh, because I think it's except for potentially from the very beginning when before he gets sent to prison. I can't remember if it talks about him laughing or not, but
he was
guaranteed in the middle
and laughing
section,
and happy.
Yeah. In the middle section, never. Yeah.
I feel like we also weren't with him very much in the middle section. And then in the beginning and the end, we do. When he is changing as a person, that's when we are with Edmund.
Yes.
We're observing him, but we're not with him.
Right.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I really liked when he's leaving Paris with Morel, he has this moment where he says goodbye to Paris. And I thought that part was really interesting too. He says, "Great city, less than 6 months have elapsed since I first entered thy gates. I believe that the Spirit of God led my steps to thee, and that he also enables me to quit thee in triumph. The secret cause of my presence within thy walls I have confided alone to him who only has the power to read my heart. God only knows that I retire from thee without pride or hatred, but not without many regrets. He only knows that the power confided to me has never been made subservient to my personal good or to any useless cause. O great city, it is in thy palpitating bosom that I have found that which I sought. Like a patient miner, I have dug deep to thy very entrails to root out evil thence. Now my work is accomplished. My mission is terminated. Now, though thou canst neither afford me pain nor pleasure, adieu, Paris, adieu." And I just thought it was fascinating because he says that. He said that his mission is accomplished, but this is before he has his confrontation with Danglars.
Yeah. It's true. And
which means
you can tell that he's come to
knew,
a place with himself.
Right. And he already knew that he was going to forgive Danglars in that conversation. Right? Otherwise, I don't think he would have been able to say he was done, that he was finished.
Right.
And it's interesting also that he's like, he realizes that he's no longer the highest authority to be answered to, because several times in this section, he's like, "No, I answer to God, or I answer to the, someone above me. I don't just have all power now." And he's been acting this whole time like he has.
Exactly.
So he had to change his perspective.
Yeah, totally. Where he's just like, it's, because he's this whole avenging angel thing again, but there was many moments in there where he was like, it was more than that, right? That he was like, he's the avenging deity. He's the one with ultimate control and power. And then he's suddenly realizing, no, that's not true at all. There is someone beyond me that has that power. And he's learned that he doesn't have control of all the events you know, like he lost control when he let Madame Villefort, you know, kill everybody, and that she killed her son. You know, he's suddenly realizing, I don't have control over all of these events that I set in motion.
Yeah. It's interesting. I also think it's interesting that the whole, like, not the whole, but like the majority of this book takes place over 6 months.
Yes. Because it feels longer than that.
Because the quote that you just read said that it had been 6 months since he entered the city.
Yep.
And it was like, he's been in Paris 6 months and he managed to destroy how many lives in 6 months?
But it took him 10 years to set it up. We just didn't find out very much about what he did in those 10 years. But once he set his plan in motion, 6 months.
Yeah. Although he was in Rome before, so maybe like that part was just like before, but
that's true.
It's pretty busy to me that we read so much it didn't feel like 6 months, but at the same time, because it was just so in depth, right? And like you were saying, Christy, so many characters to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I love that Morel and Valentine got their happy ending. I thought that was good, right? Like that the book ended on a note of hope, and not just for Dante's, but for Morel and Valentine too.
Mm-hmm. And I think that shows too how much he's changed, because he let Valentine be happy. Like before he was like, oh, I'm going to get Albert. I'm going to get all the kids. You know, I'm going to engage a daughter to her half brother. Like he didn't care. And then suddenly he's like, I'm actually going to let someone from the next generation take all my money that's here and like have a happy life.
Yeah.
So he clearly done a 180.
Definitely. That letter that he leaves for Morel at the very end was such an interesting letter, you know, and he's telling them where they can go and that they'll get, you know, they'll see her grandfather when they arrive. I love that too, that he included, you know, the grandfather in this situation. Because at first I was wondering, I'm like, are we going to find out what happens to the grandfather in this story? He's had a pretty important role so far.
Yes.
But then he says in the letter, hang on one second. Oh yeah. Tell the angel who will watch over your future destiny, Morel, to pray sometimes for a man who, like Satan, thought himself for an instant equal to God, but who now acknowledges that with Christian humility that God alone possesses supreme power and infinite wisdom. Perhaps those prayers may soften the remorse he feels in his heart. As for you, Morel, this is the secret of my conduct towards you. There is neither happiness nor misery in the world. There is only the comparison of one state with another, nothing more. He who has felt the deepest grief is best able to experience supreme happiness. We must have felt what it is to die, Morel, that we may appreciate the enjoyment of living. Live then and be happy, beloved children of my heart, and never forget that until the day that when God shall deign to reveal the future to man, all human wisdom is summed up in these two words: wait and hope.
Great,
and I loved that. What's that?
It was a great ending to the book.
Yeah.
Just, like, wrapped it all up.
Yeah. And then he lays it out for Morel too. He was like, listen, this is what I've learned, right? I am not God. I don't have supreme control over people. And, you know, we shouldn't attempt that. That doesn't go well, you know? And then, he was like, because in the letter, he lets him know why he let Morel go as far as he did, right? Why he let Morel actually take the poison and kill himself. Because he was like, you have to have those deep feelings or those deep griefs in order to experience deep happiness. So that's curious. Like, do you guys agree with that as a viewpoint, right? Like that those who have experienced suffering maybe have greater happiness?
I think you have a greater appreciation for things. Because, like, I know we all have had health struggles. And I know that when you are totally healthy, you don't think about it until you lose that. And so I think having like that appreciation for like the really good days is because of having the really bad days. But also it's like, you pushed it a little far. Like, you have to die in order to live.
Yeah, maybe not everybody has to do that, right? Like, maybe you don't have to go that. Everybody doesn't have to go that far.
We don't have to take the poison, but
yeah.
One thing that I did want to talk about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Christy.
I was just gonna ask, did you guys notice when he became, instead of undead, he became like an angel? I don't know. It seemed like, because at one point there was a lot of imagery that made him, when we weren't with him, a lot of times other people were seeing him as like this very dark figure. And then at a certain point, he becomes, like when he reveals himself to Morel's family, the kids, you know, as his personality, like their whole thoughts, all of their thoughts of him instantly change, you know. So I feel like the undead theme changes at that point.
Yeah. I also felt like that changed when he was at Chateau d'If, because then he had to like go back to that point from before.
Oh yeah, like rebirth.
Like the whole thing that we've been talking about, you know, how he became like a brand new person. And I feel like that kind of also, and then also when he always revealed himself, I feel like that he had to finally identify himself. Because I can't remember who it was. Was it Ferdinand who said, you have hundreds of names? One of the villains said that. And he's like, I actually only have one, and it's Edmond Dantes. Like, for him to actually own up to it, I feel like also had to be that moment where he had to accept that that's who he still was.
Yeah.
Just a man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Just a man. That so you mentioned when he tells who he is to the kids, to Julie and to Maximilian. But then later he has a scene where he's saying goodbye to them because he knows he's leaving probably for good from Paris. And I thought Julie had some interesting comments to make. So the Count, I don't know if the Count is in this conversation yet or not. One second. Julie says, might we not almost fancy, Emmanuel, that those people so rich, so happy, but yesterday had forgotten in their prosperity that an evil genius, like the wicked fairies in Perrault's stories, who present themselves unbidden at a wedding or baptism, hovered over them and appeared all at once to revenge himself for their fatal neglect.
Yes.
What a dire misfortune, said Emmanuel, thinking of Morcerf and Danglars. What dreadful suffering, said Julie, remembering Valentine, but whom with a delicacy natural to women she did not name before her brother. If the Supreme Being has directed the fatal blow, said Emmanuel, it must be that he in his great goodness has perceived nothing in the past lives of these people to merit mitigation of their awful punishment. So they're having this whole conversation, but not like necessarily putting Don or the Count of Monte Cristo in that role. Like they're saying these are people who have done bad, and I don't know, they're getting their just desserts. Maybe. I don't know. I just thought that was,
yeah, it's very interesting
because they clearly were okay with the events. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, and then because then all of a sudden after that conversation of kind of they're talking about him without naming him or maybe putting him in that position, you know, then he suddenly shows up, and Emmanuel says, never see you again, never behold you again. It is not a man then, but some angel that leaves us. And this angel is on the point of returning to heaven after having appeared on earth to do good.
Wow.
Well, that was interesting, right? Like ultimately, like their view that he did good, but like that's questionable about some of the stuff that he did. Did he actually do good? He did do some good in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah.
One character that I really wanted to mention.
Oh, sorry, just to finish this off, because what you were saying, Christy, because then he goes on to say to Emmanuel, he says, "No, I am but a man, and your admiration is as unmerited as your words are sacrilegious." Like, so there's the Count right there admitting it. He's like, I am just a man.
Mm-hmm.
He has to own it.
Yeah.
The one character who I wanted to talk about a bit more was the grandfather, because of how he like goes through all the steps of protecting his granddaughter, Valentine. Like, I don't know, I felt like he would be a master chess player if he had the physical capabilities of doing it. Because we've seen before that he's not like mentally delayed or anything. Like, he hasn't had any of those problems with older age. It's just been his body. And like, I know my grandfather had Parkinson's before he passed away, but it was like his brain was all there. Like, it was just the physical capability. And I feel like if this grandfather would have been able, I can't remember his name right now.
Nortier or something?
Yeah, Nortier.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that. But if he had been able to, he would have been like a master chess player. Like, you know, being like, we're going to, you know, administer this like pre-poison guard. And then you like do all these things. And like, even the way he handled the whole breaking of the engagement, so many strategic levels for that guy.
Yeah. He was a genius. Like, honestly, I agree with you. Like, he would have been a master chess player. Like, he, you know, strategizing and thinking ahead and working against such great odds, right? Because he couldn't do anything physically and communication was really difficult. And he was also like constantly combating the impression that he was less than he is, right? Because that's so easy. You know, there was the husband of one of my Sunday school teachers had a stroke. And so he was in a wheelchair and he couldn't communicate. So very much like Nortier in that situation, right? And it was a constant struggle to remind myself that just because he couldn't communicate with me doesn't mean he doesn't understand me, and doesn't mean that he is lesser intellectually either, right? Like, so that constantly reminding myself to have normal conversations with him and not, you know, be patronizing, because that can be so easy, right? To have these patronizing conversations because the person can't talk back to you, like you can't have an actual conversation. But to remind yourself, like, in his mind, he knows exactly what I'm saying, and he just can't communicate with me. And so, you know, Nortier is constantly up against that with like, I do know what's going on. I just have struggle communicating that, you know, with you. But so the fact that he was able to do all that he did in that situation is seriously impressive.
Yes. And he had such a blessing in Valentine too. Like, not everybody is as lucky to have that kind of a caretaker, you know.
Yeah.
She fully devoted herself to him.
Yeah. That was the one good thing he had still in his life. Aside from, obviously, he had his wits about him.
But he was willing to fight for her then in every capacity, whether that be her marriage or her life.
Yeah. And so then that made the scene between him and his son, Villefort, so great when, because they, you know, I can't remember if they kind of went into detail about it or not, but like, Nortier knew that it was Villefort's wife that was doing it, and that he expected Villefort to do something about that. And that, you know, and then so like those moments where I think Villefort was outside and Nortier was like looking at him through the window, and it was just a look, like he communicated it was just a look. And Villefort was like, okay, I need to do something now. I can't wait anymore. Like, Nortier is like, it's going to happen now, right?
He's like, I'm still your father. I'm still your father. But, yeah.
And that Villefort was like, okay, there's going to be problems if I don't fulfill my end of the bargain, right? Like, you knew that he had made a bargain with his father, and he knew he couldn't get away with not doing anything about it. Even though his father was in a wheelchair and couldn't communicate, he still was like, no, I need to fulfill my end of the bargain or there is going to be big trouble.
Yeah. But I think also at that point, he had reached the decision where he was no longer fighting for reputation. He was fighting for justice, because he was like, my daughter was, you know, unjustly accused, and then she dies, and I'm the one responsible because I did not deal with this poison issue before.
Yeah.
So he took it on himself.
It was interesting because I think he really would have taken his wife to trial, but he was still trying to get to solve the issue without having to go that far.
Yeah. Reputation. Still there.
It was still a struggle. Yeah.
Yes.
Even though he did, like, the fact that it was his daughter, he was like, okay, that's it. That's the line. But because he could have just had her arrested. But instead he was like, you know what you need to do kind of thing. So it was still in the back of his mind, reputation was still there. Yeah.
And I don't think she believed him until he's like, if I come back and you're alive, you're going to the jail. Like,
yeah.
Man.
And it never crossed his mind that she would kill their son either.
Didn't cross my mind either. It's like, why would you do that? That seems, I don't know, that didn't make sense to me.
No.
Her reasoning was a little off.
Oh yeah, I mean, she was as a general, in general her reasoning was off.
Yeah.
I think it has to be when you kill that many people.
Yes. I remember like the number being in there, like she's 25. So she's not even like a 40-year-old or like someone who has like lots of years of experience. She's 25.
Yeah.
And she's done this much.
Yeah.
With no moral compass to say that's wrong, to like poison these many people.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is because she did it for her son. It was all for her son, right? She wanted her son to have money and the title or whatever. And which made it actually make more sense in the end that she would kill her son then too, if she was going to kill herself, because she knew she wouldn't be there anymore to push for her son's rights, and that maybe there wasn't going to be any more money. And so, I mean, I guess, like in her twisted mind, it made sense to her, I guess.
I also understand Bill for like pushing forward with that, because can you imagine being married to someone who you know has killed like 4 people and all because of money, and like you're the only one who's preventing someone from inheriting? Like, if you knew that, I don't think you could be with that person safely. Like you could like live in that house with them, considering everything you eat might be poisoned. Like the hot chocolate he drank. He's like, I'm just going to down this because either way I'm going to die if this is poisoned. Like,
yeah. Like how could you live like that? Like with that thought always in the back of your mind that your spouse isn't going to kill you? Like,
yeah.
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 So, definitely something I can understand him. Even if he didn't want to go that route, I think he would have absolutely gone forward with her because of just his own safety. Self-preservation's been strong with him for a very long time. So I feel like that would be a factor.
I just had this thought of, okay, so The Count of Monte Cristo, I think this is the only book I've ever read where the main character starts as a hero, turns into an anti-hero, turns into the villain, and then ends back as the hero. I don't know. I can't think of another book that's like that. And the genius of it is that I was sympathetic to Dante's the whole time, which is like, it's amazing. So like, can you guys think of, are there any other books that were able to do that?
Or not with the turn that I can think of. Because there's like books that are like led by anti-heroes or like, you know, from the villain's perspective, but I can't think of any where they were the good guy and the bad guy. The hero.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's Star Wars. But he doesn't really become the good guy again by the end. Like Anakin.
Yes, Anakin, the Star Wars arc. That's the
ones they start at. Like,
yeah. What was that, Janelle?
Oh no, I didn't say anything. I was just trying to remember Star Wars. I'm not as familiar with Star Wars, so I was just trying to work it through in my head what you were. Yeah,
Anakin, who is Darth Vader, but then he does
Darth
turn up
Vader.
I remember he becomes a Jedi at the end. Like after he dies, he's seen in like as a Jedi. So maybe he has that little good guy moment at the very end. But
yeah, at the end he does, but I feel like he doesn't. It's not to the point of the Count of Monte Cristo where he's like leading the story again, you know. But you do feel sympathy for him again after a certain point.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have anything else to discuss about this unless you both have something else.
Nope, that was everything for me.
I just want to say I'm really glad now that I can see the ties between this and like the Red Rising trilogy.
That must be on my to-read list now because
yes, it's so good.
That's awesome.
Yes.
I'm just glad that I read this book with you guys. Like being able to discuss it throughout was so fun. Like I don't know that I would have enjoyed it as much if I just read it on my own.
Same. Yeah. Hearing you guys discuss it was really like the most fun part for me.
It adds depth to the everything because when you don't see something, someone else does, and it's always great.
Yes.
Yeah. So should we introduce our next year book?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
So we had struggles. We are like, so Victoria, she had her baby, if you didn't know. So she's not able to be here today for that reason. But we were like, between the four of us, what book have we not read that is good enough for a summer read? So we struggled, but we came up with Bleak House by Charles Dickens. So I actually have it here. It's big, but I've heard it's kind of a mystery too. Like there's a mystery element in it. So we're going to be reading Bleak House next year, just because it's the one thing we all haven't read that we could agree on.
I'm excited. I want to read more Dickens, but it's always so daunting because his books are so long. And so, you know, knowing that we're going to do this in 2.5 months and being able to discuss it as we go, I think is really gonna make it a great experience.
And I don't think it's as long as the Count, although as I'm looking, I might be proven wrong. No, it's 800 pages, 900 pages. So
not quite as long.
Not as long, just a bit shorter. We're getting shorter every year because last year was a mess.
Well, potentially as complicated. Like from what I've heard, I know a little bit about the story, and it is quite complicated, and there's a lot of characters. So I'm thinking, I never did this with the Count of Monte Cristo because I didn't think about it until too far into the book, but I think I'm going to create like a character tree or something to keep everybody straight.
And I think that'd be good with this one because I've read the first, 150 pages or 100 pages. And if I remember everything right, it's all about trying to find an inheritor for this inheritance. So that's going to be everyone connected. But then there's all these other side things too, like Dickens likes to do. So
yeah.
Although we have
isn't it the case? And the case has been in court for years and years or something.
Decades. There's almost it's not worth the amount of money you're going into it for anymore, or something like that, if I remember right.
The only
there's
people
still money, but it's just not as much. Yes.
Yeah.
So it'll be fun next year, I'm sure. And we'll France and go to England.
That Classics Book Club.
We're a big Classics Book Club.
Yeah.
Maybe we should rename ourselves. But yeah, so Bleak House, if anyone's interested in joining us next year, that'll be our book. It'll be a good one, I think. Oh, and even on the back, it just says Dickens' chilling tale of murder and betrayal. So we're not going to get too far away from anything. We'll see how that goes. We all don't know anything, I think. So that'll be great. Be nice to walk in all blind.
Yes.
But yeah.
Exciting. Thank you so much, Naomi, for doing this.
I have so much fun reading these books with everybody. It's great. So I don't mind at all.
You're a great host.
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess if we're all done the Count Monte Cristo discussions, we'll sign off. That's crazy to think that's already here, but yeah.
Let us know in the comments if you're watching this, especially if you're watching this afterwards, let us know in the comments what you thought about the Count of Monte Cristo. That would be really good to hear.
Actually, I have one final question. Anyone have a favorite character overall from the book?
Ooh, good question.
It's a lot of cast, but anyone have a character or a favorite character?
I really loved Mercedes. I wanted a happier ending for her. I just feel like she ended very heartbroken, but I feel like she must be a really incredible person, you know?
Yeah.
She's been through a lot.
Yeah.
But kept her character.
And still standing after it all.
So, yeah. She has a whole new life ahead of her.
Yes.
I really liked Valentine. I thought she was a good character.
Yes.
I think she's one of the few that we could be like, that person's not bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I love Valentine and her grandfather.
Yes,
those
the
two.
pair.
Yeah. Both of them for their pair, but also for how they work individually and together. So
yeah.
Love them both. Yeah. And leave us your favorite character or your favorite moment from the book in the comments after the fact. Thank you so much for reading with us this whole summer. It's been rewarding for me. So I hope it's been rewarding for everyone else.
Yeah.
Yes. Me too.
Even to say that you've read it. Some people.
It's a big accomplishment to be able to say that, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess we'll sign off until next year for our big
book club. Bye.
But join us for Bleak House. Don't forget.
Bleak House. Woo!